11 है ना?
Every RSVP was so we have 70 RSVPs. See how many it's really people come in late. Good for you. Not surprised. It's a nice postage. Yeah, yeah. We had it. We had it. I'll tell you about something. मुझे लाइव स्ट्रीम म्यूट करना चाहिए मुझे आवाज आ रही है यहाँ से but that's okay
चलो अभी भी ला सकते हैं ये अभी ला सकते हैं कैसा होता है वाली गेम अरे उनका तो खुद हो गया वो जो बंदा लेके आ रहा है वो पता नहीं क्या है उसके बिना तो
इनका कैमरा वैसे भी कैप्चर तो करना चाहिए जो यहाँ पे स्पीकर का साउंड है
इनफ नहीं है ना वो क्लैरिटी नहीं होगी ना उसमें एक एनालिस्ट ज्वाइन कर रहा है वहाँ से चलेगा काम
हाँ 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 मैं ऐसे आपको इसमें एक्सएलआर टू एक्सएलआर लगेगी एक्सएलआर टू कौन सी लगेगी और मेरे ख्याल से वो एक्सएलआर
We're so sorry. Because there are about 100 people joining us on live stream globally, and due to tech issues, the live stream people haven't got an audio cable.
हाँ लग सकती है
Super bright guy with the audio cable is trying
लग
to
जाए
find the location, and he can't find it. So we're kind of struggling to get the audio cable. Just please bear with us. As soon as the audio cable is here, we'll be able to start the show and also live stream to our people. So sorry about this. Please bear with us.
इसकी पिन सही है क्या कभी गड़बड़ हो गई
नहीं हो जाएगी
आपने ऑडियो इन चाहिए ना हाँ आपको इन चाहिए आपको इन
ठीक है
और आप मुझे HDMI में आउट
दूसरी में आउट तो आपको गया है
उसमें ऑडियो भी आ जाएगा
हाँ
तो यहाँ तो आप इससे इन लो पहले चेक करते हैं
1 मिनट रुकिए ना एक बार साउंड तो आ रही है इसमें मैं वहाँ से चेक कर सारी मैच से हुआ ना।
हाँ
वो सब जो है
बस इसको मत हिलाना, एक बार हो गया आपका। अब स्टार्ट करो।
स्टार्ट कर दीजिए ना, कोई दिक्कत नहीं है।
कर दे।
बस ये सामान आ गया इनका।
Okay, good news. The cable is here. Woohoo! So we will start soon.
इसकी जरूरत नहीं है, मैंने कर दी
मैं बोल सकता हूँ कि 5 मिनट में स्टार्ट कर दीजिए। डन करो 5 मिनट।
आपकी कैमरा
मेरा फोन नहीं है, नंबर
फोन नहीं है। नाम क्या है?
ऐसे तो हो ही जाता था।
क्या
ऐसे तो डायरेक्ट हो ही जाता था, फिर इसका क्या है? किसका?
हो गया? जुगाड़ कर दिया मैंने, अब कर लो।
अरे यार, तो कितने देर केबल केबल का हम बता रहे थे। वही तो मैं कह रहा हूँ, केबल तो इन्हीं लोग देंगे ना। तो केबल कौन सा है? कोई केबल का जरूरत नहीं है, डायरेक्ट लग गया। हाँ, ठीक है, ये सामने केबल तो फिर केबल ये केबल कहाँ से है? कौन सा? ये वाला बढ़िया। आप मेरा फोन दीजिए।
You want to move up in the front and stuff. don't want to run for MP, but if you want to sit where you're sitting, that's also fine. Mine is going to be sitting on the
कौन सा इंटर था ना
mic. And this is good? Yeah. Okay, so thank you for bearing with us. I think we're starting 10 to 15 minutes late. We had some tech issues as usual. The Uber bike person had got lost. We were getting the audio cable sorted, but now it's on. So I just want to say good evening, namaste, salam alaikum to everybody who's joining us here in New Delhi and also to all those people joining us globally on the live stream. My name is Priya Suru. I'm the founder of the Azadi Project and in partnership with the Refugees International. It gives me great pleasure to launch our report today. It's called Shadow of Refuge, Rohingya in India. We will also be premiering our film, which is called Displaced and Detained of Rohingya Refugees in India. Now, my co-author Dan Sullivan of Refugees International is also going to be joining us online. And I started thinking about writing this report. We were really aware that the Rohingya population in India is not as much as we think of globally. So approximately there are about 20,000 Rohingya refugees who are in India, as compared to the 880,000 who live in the camps in Bangladesh and a few hundred thousand who are still in Myanmar. Now we've heard about the conditions in the Bangladesh camp where the Rohingya refugees go through there. We've heard about the genocide in Myanmar, the violence that they've fled. But rarely do we get to hear about the Rohingya refugees who live in India and their conditions. What we do actually only get to hear and read about them publicly is actually a lot of misinformation. They are officially called illegal migrants. People call them terrorists. People have called them termites, threat to national security. So our attempt through this report and this film is actually to show you the reality, whether you're in India or joining us globally, the reality of the Rohingya refugees who live here in India. The faces behind the slurs, the women, the children, the different lives behind the xenophobic anti-Rohingya remarks. So the report and the film simultaneously, which we will show you, Dan and I and our colleagues, some members of the Azadi Project, we moved and traveled and researched in 3 cities in India: New Delhi, Hyderabad, which has the biggest settlement of Rohingya refugees in India, and in Chennai. We're very grateful to all the Rohingya refugees who let us into their lives, shared their stories with us. This report ought to be about them. But what we found out from what they told us was actually disturbing. What they told us about their experiences was unconstitutional and also against the international laws of justice. We had people talk to us about how Rohingya in India are arbitrarily and indefinitely detained. We had mothers and children tell us how they were separated and moved into detention centers, and they barely get to see each other. We had pregnant women tell us that they could not access public health care, and some of them lost their children because of that. So this is what our report and our film wants to focus on, the reality of Rohingya refugees. We also spoke to local and international organizations, some of you who are present here, who were able to share with us about the challenges and the government scrutiny they face while trying to work with Rohingya refugees. As I said, our hope through the film, through the report, through this event is to change the negative narrative around Rohingya refugees, one of the world's most persecuted people in the world. And the fact that all of us, even though we are small in numbers, I think we are about 50 to 60 here, the fact that we have gathered all of here in Delhi, and people joining us globally, it's a small but brave step in that direction. And before I end, I just want to say that through all our research, our reporting, and our film, you will see we have tried to keep the anonymity of people who requested anonymity. So if there's any media present here, or there's media who's joining us globally, we request you to do the same, because we don't want any further persecution or any more challenges to come to these refugees. With that, I present to you the film. It's called Displaced and Detained, after which we will have a discussion. Just give me a moment to switch off the lights and get the film up on screen. And then, 1 second, just switch off the lights.
Like,
धूम नहीं देखा है, अंदर से बाहर निकलना नहीं देती है, खाना उना भी अच्छा नहीं देती, इतना खाना देती है 1 चम्मच, वो खाना खाना नहीं आती है, खाने नहीं आती है। सलमान बोलते हैं मम्मी तुम यहाँ रह जाएगी, घर पे नहीं जाओगी क्या? मैं भी यहाँ रह जाऊंगी मम्मी, पुलिस वाला मारेगी, मेरे भी पिटाई चलेगी।
तो आपको नहीं पता था तब आप अपनी अम्मी से कब मिलेंगे?
नहीं, कोई आइडिया ही नहीं था कहाँ ले गए होंगे, कहाँ होंगे, कुछ पता ही नहीं था। हाँ, लास्ट में उन्होंने बताया था जब हम वहाँ होम में पहुँच गए थे, फिर उन्होंने बताया था कि हाँ जेल में है। और उस टाइम 2 बार गया था, लेकिन मैं अम्मी से 1 बार मिल पाया हूँ। मुझे अलग कर लिया और मेरा अम्मी को अलग कर लिया, उनको जेल में डाल दिया और मुझे अलग होम पे डाल दिया। वहाँ मैं लगभग करीब 2 साल के करीब रहा हूँ।
बट एक बहन अभी भी अंदर है।
जी, कभी कभार मुझे बोलता है कि मुझे अपने आप पर गिल्ट भी फील होता है कि मेरा सिस्टर इतना दिनों से वहाँ रह रहे हैं और मैं यहाँ क्या कर रहा हूँ और मैं कुछ नहीं कर पा रहा हूँ। बहुत ही गिल्ट फील होता है अपने आप पर।
Indefinite detention is the biggest problem in India. So if you look into what indefinite detention is, under the international law, it's a form of torture. And we have signed Convention Against Torture. So we are violating that while keeping these people in detention.
They have not been given legal aid, which is the right. I mean, even if the most dreaded terrorist in the world is being held up, they have a right to legal representation. That's been denied.
The Rohingya of Myanmar are among the most persecuted people in the world. Genocidal attacks at the hands of the Myanmar military that started in August 2017 and years of persecution caused more than 770,000 Rohingya, the majority of the population living in Myanmar, to flee to Bangladesh. But at least 20,000 Rohingya came to India in search of safety and protection.
में जो सिचुएशन था वो ऐसा था कि ना ही हम चैन से सो सकते थे, ना ही चैन से पढ़ सकते थे। और उस समय बर्मीज मिलिट्री और जो नासका कहते हैं वो बार बार हमारे गांव में और विलेज में विजिट कर रहे थे। और जब वो लोग विजिट करते हैं, मैं कैसे समझाऊं, मुझे कोई वर्ड्स नहीं है। लोग इतना डर जाते हैं। और वो लोग जब आते हैं तब वो अगर घर में कुछ मिला तो लड़का मिला उसको उठा के ले जाएंगे, अगर लड़की मिला तो रेप करके चले जाएंगे। हमारा घर में आया, हम सब एक रूम पे बंद थे लॉक करके, वो उस रूम पे आई नहीं तो हम बच गए। उस सिचुएशन की बात ही मतलब हमें जो फील है वो हुआ कि अपना देश छोड़ना है उसी समय के बाद।
म्यांमार बांग्लादेश में 2 महीना,
जी
2 months in Bangladesh after that, and then entered India. Abdullah was 16 years old when he came to India. He, along with his family, was detained almost immediately upon arrival. His mother and all of his siblings were separated from each other and sent to different detention centers. None of them were allowed to be together.
पिछले 10 साल से मैंने ये चैलेंजेस फेस किया कि मतलब हम शुरुआत से अगर पढ़ना चाहें तो मतलब यहाँ पर एज ए लोकल जैसा पढ़ते हैं वैसा तो पढ़ ले सकते। हम सबके लिए यही चैलेंज बहुत बड़ा चैलेंज था कि हम पढ़ के एटलीस्ट 10 तक आ जाते हैं पढ़ने के लिए। फिर उसके बाद 10 के बाद 12 का एग्ज़ाम लिखना पड़ता है, वो भी तो लिख दे सकते हैं आजकल। लेकिन अगर आपको डिग्री तक पढ़ना है या फिर कुछ जॉब करना है, हर कोई आधार कार्ड पूछते हैं, अकाउंट्स पूछते हैं या फिर कुछ भी पैन कार्ड वगैरह ये सब पूछते हैं।
Farhana Roshan was just 9 years old when her family moved to Mewat in northern India in 2013 from Myanmar. Once in India, she faced many hurdles in completing her high school.
हम लोगों को मैडम ने इतने प्यार से इतने अच्छे से पूरा 10th की तैयारी करवाया था, इतना मतलब अच्छे से पूरा कंप्लीटली बोर्ड एग्ज़ाम लिखने के लिए तैयार हो गए थे हम। सडनली ऐसे में मालूम होता है कि हमारे पास आधार कार्ड नहीं है, नहीं हो सकता एग्ज़ाम।
But Farhana persisted, and by bringing in non-profit organizations to advocate for her education, she and 3 other of her friends became the first batch of Rohingya children in India to graduate from the 10th grade. But they were just an exception. Most Rohingya children still do not have access to higher education.
उसके लिए मतलब यहाँ पर कुछ ना कुछ काम तो करना ज़रूरी होगा इंडिया में ही, ताकि वो लोग कुछ पढ़ लिख कर आगे बढ़े। के लिए मैंने एक तरगीब बोल के ग्रुप भी बनाया था जहाँ पर 50+ गर्ल्स को एडमिशन करवाया था जाकर। अगर इस तरह के एजुकेशन में रुकावटें आए तो फिर वो जो लोग जिसको मैंने जाकर एडमिशन कराया था, जिसके पेरेंट्स को जाकर कन्विंस किया था पढ़ाने के लिए, कौन विश्वास करेगा।
Most Rohingya in India live in slum-like settlements in urban areas, and these spaces lack running water and toilets.
इसमें नीचे तो पूरा गली का कचरा वाला पानी जाने के लिए नाला है। अच्छा, यहाँ खाना खाते हो बहुत बदबू आती है। रात को भी सोने के टाइम से बदबू आती है, नींद भी नहीं आती है, ठीक तक नहीं देखते।
The land they live on is often owned by Indian landowners who charge rent. The settlements are constructed of wood, metal and plastic sheets and placed closely together, leaving them susceptible to fires. Several fires have actually broken out in refugee settlements over the years, with some suspected to have been started on purpose by right-wing extremists.
रोहिंग्याओं को रोकना चाहिए, नहीं रोकना चाहिए? जोर से बोलो, रोकना चाहिए, नहीं रोकना चाहिए? रोहिंग्या को कभी भी स्वीकार नहीं किया जाएगा। मैं आज फिर से स्पष्ट।
3-year-old Salman is here to see his mother, who has been in detention for more than 2 years now. He is accompanied by his aunt Sabira.
मेरा यहाँ डिटेंशन कैंप में आ गया मेरा बहन से मिलने के लिए, तो गेट में खड़ा है, एक पुलिस वाला आके गेट खुलने दे रहे हैं। अंदर से एक मैम आके मत दियो ऐसे मत दियो, जैसे अफराल ऑफिस से लेटर लेकर आएगी तब भी घुसना दे रही है।
After some pleading, Sabira and Salman are finally permitted to see Shadia.
इतना देर हो गई, 2 साल तो ज़्यादा हो गई अंदर से, तो अभी परेशानी ये है कि कितना देर तक रह जाएगी, हमें अंदर से नहीं निकालोगी, ऐसे रो रहे हैं अंदर से।
Indian law says that the right to life and equality before law are applicable to any person on Indian territories. So that's a constitutional right that cannot be taken away from any person, irrespective of whether they're a citizen or non-citizens. So clearly it's applicable to the detained person. Now, the question that's being raised about the conditions within the detention center, leaving someone in a poorly ventilated place without any sunlight and giving her terrible food and not giving her any bedding and warm water, etc. It's not just violative of her right to life. Right to life just does not mean mere animal existence. It means to be able to live with human dignity and respect.
The Indian government says that it is not a signatory of the Refugee Convention, and so it looks at the Rohingya as illegal migrants. In February 2017, a member of India's ruling party, the BJP, petitioned the State High Court of Jammu and Kashmir, seeking identification and deportation of Rohingyas. Soon after, India's Minister of Home Affairs said that all Rohingya were to be deported and sent back to Myanmar.
How can you simply call a population coming from a country who has faced persecution and has international documents on that they are facing persecution, call them illegal immigrant? The second thing is, how can a person be an illegal? They can be irregular immigrants. They didn't come with a regular means of coming to this country, but they cannot be illegal. Human beings cannot be illegal. India has made statements in international forums that we protect refugees. And even though we don't have refugee law in India, they are protected by the Constitution.
Farhana's persistence and determination to pursue higher education was rewarded not by India but by an international organization. She has secured a place with full scholarship in the University of British Columbia, Canada, and is all set to start school this fall.
तो मतलब कनाडा जाऊंगी इंशाल्लाह, फिर उसके बाद पढ़ाई अपना शुरू करूंगी। बात सिर्फ मेरे नहीं है, कम्युनिटी के बच्चे जो भी कुछ बनने की कोशिश में हैं, मतलब सपना देख रहे इतने बड़े बड़े। मैं खुश नहीं हूँ कि मुझे ये मौका मिला है या फिर प्राउड फील नहीं कर रही हूँ कि मुझे वहाँ जाने का मौका मिल रहा है। मैं आवाज़ तो करूँगी, उसके लिए एटलीस्ट 2-3 साल लग जाएगा। जब तक ये लोगों का फ्यूचर क्या है, उसके लिए मतलब यहाँ पर कुछ ना कुछ काम तो करना ज़रूरी होगा इंडिया में ही, ताकि वो लोग कुछ पढ़ लिख कर आगे बढ़े।
Meanwhile, Abdullah, who is now in his 12th grade and finally out of the detention center, doesn't know if he will be able to start college. He lives in fear of being detained again. The fear keeps him from living a full life, and he prefers to stay invisible and in the shadows.
जब भी अगर मैं इन चीज़ों को लेकर दिमाग में बैठता हूँ तो मेरा दिमाग कुछ भी काम नहीं करता, पूरा ब्लाइंड हो जाता है कि ना ही कुछ फ्यूचर देखता है, ना ही कुछ करने का मतलब रीज़न दिखाई देता है।
For the Rohingya living in India, the restricted rights, harassment, and fear of detention and deportation rule their everyday choices and life. Rather than providing the world's most persecuted people refuge, India has instead re-victimized them.
हाँ, माँ की याद आती है ना, रोता है हमारा मम्मी के पास नहीं मिलने जाएगी क्या, आ जाना मिलने जाऊँ, शादी अख्तर को मिलने नहीं जाएगी मम्मी, आ जा मिलने जाएंगे, देखने जाएंगे, कितना देर हो गई, ऐसे ऐसे बोल दे रहे।
Now, moving to the panel discussion after the film, I hope that film has given you all enough to think about right now in the room as you need to look at that. But for now, I think we should do some more things to know and talk about and think about for that discussion. Let me start requesting our panelists. So my co-author of the report, Dan Sullivan from Refugees International, is actually joining us online from Washington, D.C. And can you see Dan on the screen, please? Great. Dan is the Director of Asia, Africa, and the Middle East at Refugees International, and he has covered and written about the Rohingya since 2012. As you know, he's also the co-author of the report. Over here in New Delhi with us is also Mr. Prashant Bhushan. So can you please come up on the stage? He is an Indian public interest lawyer in the Supreme Court of India and has represented Rohingya in the apex court to stop their deportation. I think the case was in 2021. We also have Ujjani Chatterjee, who is a human rights lawyer and is currently representing Sabira. You saw her story in the film. The Rohingya refugee, and Sabira also joins us today. Sabira has petitioned the Delhi High Court against the unlawful and indefinite detention of her sister, who has been in detention since April 2020. So it's almost 3 years. In fact, it's more than 3 years that Sabira's sister has been in detention and has been away from her son and family. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to move there so that it's easier for us to kind of do the panel discussion. But Dan, let me start with you. You have looked at the Rohingya issue for more than a decade now. If you can just briefly tell everybody here and people who are joining us on the live stream a little bit about who the Rohingya really are and what are the reasons that caused them to flee Myanmar, and just give us a little bit of quick background on that.
Yes, thank you, Priyali. First of all, I just want to say thanks to Priyali and the Azadi Project for partnering with Refugees International on this report and on the powerful film we just saw. I also want to thank the fellow panelists and would like to thank all the Rohingya who spoke with us during our research. As Priyali said, I'm with Refugees International. We're based in the United States, and we're an independent advocacy group that focuses exclusively on humanitarian displacement crises around the world. And we don't take any government or UN funding, which allows us to be particularly independent and credible. So I've been working on the Rohingya for the better part of my career, having visited Rohingya in Rakhine State in Myanmar, in Malaysia, in Thailand, and several trips to Bangladesh and the camps, which are now the largest refugee settlement in the world. There's been less attention, as Priyali pointed out, on the Rohingya population in India. And I think it's important to reiterate that Rohingya have faced decades of persecution, and that led up to the genocide that we saw in August 2017. And since then, we've seen the same military responsible for these issues, responsible for the genocide, carry out a coup in February 2021, and that's left the country in civil war, and we're seeing civilians attacked. So what that means for the Rohingya is that any prospect of a safe return is pretty distant now. I think the crux of it is that the addressing the root causes in Myanmar and creating conditions for a safe return are going to be very complex and difficult. But providing refuge to the people who fled genocide should not be. Unfortunately, we're seeing that in many places. And India is important because we haven't seen as much attention to the Rohingya, but I think it's also a good example, a microcosm of the broader issue of a failure to provide the most basic of protections to the Rohingya in countries across the region. So the story of the Rohingya in India really, as we saw in the film, is first and foremost one of detention and deportation. All the Rohingya that we spoke to had a widespread fear of being detained and deported back to the very genocidal regime that they fled from. And for good reason. There are hundreds of Rohingya who are currently detained in India, and there are some who have been returned with calls for more widespread forced returns. And to be clear, that is a violation of the international principle of non-refoulement. And as my legal colleagues on the panel can say better than I, it's also a violation of India's own laws and constitution. Secondly,
Dan, I'll come back to you. Just stay with us. I think that's a good segue into coming to Mr. Bhushan. So, Mr. Bhushan, you took up the case in Supreme Court in 2021, and you were representing the refugees against deportation. Now, as Dan mentioned, that is, deportation is pretty much against the principle of non-refoulement. Could you tell me a little bit about what made you take up the case? How did that go, and what ultimately the Supreme Court ordered on that?
The reason for taking on the case was quite simple and obvious, that we were getting reports about, it was absolutely clear that the Rohingya are sort of the worst persecuted refugees in the world almost. The kind of persecution that they have faced in Myanmar, the genocide that they have faced in Myanmar is perhaps worse than what any other community of refugees has faced. And those who had come to India were clearly refugees. Sending them back or sending them out would clearly violate their right to life under Article 21, would violate several other international conventions that India has signed, the Convention for the Protection of Child Rights, the Convention Against Torture, the Convention Against Genocide, etc. And yet the Indian government had issued a statement that all of them would be sent back. The Indian government at that time was this current Modi government. And unfortunately, you see, it kind of suited their political design to label the Rohingya refugees as Rohingya Muslims. And they also alleged that they were terrorists and involved in terrorism, though there was absolutely no evidence that any of the Rohingyas living in India were involved in any kind of crime, what to say, of terrorism, etc. But yet, this kind of narrative suited the BJP government because of their own communal divisive narrative. So they always called them Rohingya Muslims. They always called them Rohingya terrorists and Rohingya Muslims by design, in order to kind of create hate against Muslims in general in this country, which is their political agenda. And that's also obvious from the Citizenship Amendment Act, which was brought. The ostensive purpose of that was to allow refugees who had fled religious persecution or persecution from other countries to get citizenship in India. But by design, they left out Myanmar. They only mentioned 3 countries, Bangladesh, Pakistan and Afghanistan. Didn't mention Myanmar, Sri Lanka, etc. and that. And they purposely left out Muslims because Rohingyas are primarily Muslims. So therefore, this Citizenship Amendment Act also suited the communal agenda of the BJP. So we moved the court for purely humanitarian reasons, and we pointed out that Article 21 protects them from being sent back. Various other, even if we have not signed the Refugee Convention, there are various other conventions which we have signed, which also protect them from being sent back. And sending them back would be sending them back to their death. Unfortunately, that case is still pending. That main case is still pending, but in 2 particular cases where we sought interim orders against a few people, in those 2 cases, the Supreme Court did not allow our applications to prevent them from being sent back. In the first case, they said that these people have agreed to go back. And they didn't even, we asked the court to at least get this verified. Government is making the statement, please send some independent observer to verify that they have agreed to go back. But unfortunately, the court didn't do that and allowed the government to send them back. In the second case, where we moved this interim application, unfortunately, the observations of the court were even worse. And they said that it is of no concern to India as to what happens to these people outside the country. That's of no consequence and of no concern to India. I mean, completely rubbishing our constitution, completely rubbishing all the jurisprudence that has been laid out. Quite apart from all these things, you see, non-refoulement is one of those sort of very basic principles of international law which has to be enforced by any country, irrespective of whether we have signed any treaty or not. It's called just cogence norm, which means that a norm which is so basic that it has to be enforced. But that main case is still pending, and we are going to mention that case for hearing soon after the court reopens for after vacation in July. One interim order that was passed initially in this case was that these people should be provided basic educational facilities as well as healthcare facilities. They should be able to access education and healthcare. So that's where it is.
So, Mr. Bhushan, again, I'm going to take this point to Jenny, who's also representing Rohingya refugees from the Delhi High Court. So, Jenny, I've been sitting and listening to your arguments in the case. It's fantastic, I'm a fan. But I also want to ask you that, as Mr. Bhushan said, deportation is against the international principle of non-refoulement. Also against, and it's also unconstitutional. But when you argue in the case, you don't talk so much about deportation. You actually say that they need to be released from the detention and then you can continue the process, whatever you want around deportation. Can you kind of explain to us what is the logic behind that and why are you talking about that? Just turn on your mic, please. It should be green light.
As it was in case, as of course Mr. Bhushan explains, the argument around deportation is something that's pending to the Supreme Court, and that is the pretext upon which a lot of Rohingyas are being detained. Now, also the interim judgment of Canada basically says that Rohingyas cannot be deported unless procedure established by law is followed. Now, the point that I'm trying to make is procedure established by law essentially means that if, say, X person is to be deported, we have to get in touch with the obvious country of origin, in this case is Myanmar, and ask that country, the government, to first accept that yes, these are our citizens, and then arrange for their travel documents, which is essentially a passport. So that would mean that you make a passport and a travel document and ensure that this person is sent back home to safety, not trafficked or brutalized or something bad happens to them. That's Article 21, and obviously India's country does not become a part of a big, human trafficking racket, right? And if that happens, if Myanmar, for instance, accepts that X is my citizen and gives me a passport, and if India is able to do that, India should get a Nobel Prize, because that's the whole point of the genocide, the killing of people and othering that's happening in Myanmar, where they are said that they're not citizens. Now, my case is about the existing laws which are there for people, the foreigners who claim to be refugees. Now, of course, Article 21, 14, equal representation before law, and right to life are very much part of the Constitution. Even the ministry, the union ministry, has from time to time given their standard operating procedures, by which refugees, people, foreigners who are claiming to be refugees, we have to first consider them for long-term visas. And if you see the prints taken from the website of the state visa the website requirements of the state visa, one of the requirements is a UNHCR card. If at all they're not able to deport me back to a particular country, then they're supposed to work with the UNHCR and think of a third country resettlement. If none, and these are not, I'm not quoting any international law. Now, one of the reasons why India says they're not part of the 1951 Convention is because they say that we have enough laws in our country. That's what we often say, why do we need an international law to come in between and interfere, etc. Right? So yes, we do. We have these standard operating procedures, and I don't think, and also these detentions are civil administrative detentions. So they do not have the safeguards that a criminal detention would have. One cannot apply for bail, parole. They are not produced before a magistrate within 24 hours. So, and also there's a 2019 manual which gives out how detention centers should be. I have worked kind of closely with the detention center in Shehzada Bagh in Delhi, the one which we saw, and the conditions are no way conducive of human existence and conducive of the requirements that are given in that manual. So it's more about implementation of what is already existing. From asking for larger points of law, we have gone down to these basic things like getting good food or access to sunlight, or a chance to be out of indefinite detention, particularly when I have 3-year-old children outside. I've not committed a single criminal act my whole life. And I'm not even being accused by the government of the state for any criminal act. So it's indefinite, right? It's worse than death penalty. I have the highest possible sentence that can happen. So,
yeah, I think that's exactly what the Commission also mentioned, that most of these people don't have any cases against them, but they are still in detention. So through our research and our interviews, and this is not really a fixed number because there is no fixed number, right? Because there's no due legal process followed. What we were told is about 500 Rohingya are in detention in India in various detention centers. Now those detention centers can take the form of jails. Those detention centers, like in Delhi, they are called Seva Kendra, which literally translates into a service center, but really the kind of service that they get inside is very questionable. Or holding centers, as we see in Assam. So, Sabira ji, मैं आपसे पूछना चाहूँगी, and for everybody who doesn't speak Hindi, I will translate. Sabira ji, मैं आपसे पूछना चाहूँगी कि आपकी बहन 3 साल से डिटेंशन सेंटर में है, 2 साल से ऊपर हो गया है, और आप उनसे कभी-कभी जाके मिल सकती है, तो वो जब आप जाते हैं वहाँ पे, वो आपको क्या बताती है?
जैसे महीने 2 बार 3 बार मिलने जाती है, किसी बार मिलने देती है, किसी बार मिलने नहीं देती है। जाओ आप जाओ, जो अपना ऑफिस में कागज लेकर फिर मिल दूंगी, बस नहीं मिलना है, मिलने नहीं देती। महीने में एक बार जाती है, हर जैसे 2-3 महीने के बाद एक बार जाती है। इतना दूर से जाती है, किसी बार मिलने भी नहीं देते, घुसने भी नहीं देते, वो आकर चला जाती है। So it takes Sabira almost 700 rupees to get to the detention center from the settlement, which roughly translates to $8 to $10, just to go and meet her sister. And many times she goes with a nephew, the sister's son, who's 3 years old, to go and see her sister, and she's turned away from the kids. And this, she's saying, happens many times. But आप हमें बताएंगे जब आप अंदर जा गई हैं और जब आपने उनसे बात की है, तो वहाँ पे उनकी तबीयत कैसी है, उनके हालात कैसे हैं? तबीयत तो बहुत खराब है, जैसे बात आती है, बहुत चलने भी नहीं आती है, पैर में सूजन आ जाती है, तो इतना रोते चलने भी, मेरा पास भी आना नहीं है, चलने नहीं आती, पैर में सूजन आ गई, तो रोते मैंने बोला, तो कहा कैसे छुड़ूंगी, कैसे बात होगी, कैसे रोते So Sabira is saying that her sister's condition is deteriorating. She's had various health issues. In fact, because as seen in the film, they say that they don't have access to any sunlight, they're not allowed to go outside. We've heard through our interviews with many people who've been former detainees and are now outside, that the lack of any sunlight, which is lack of vitamin D, has led to physical disabilities.
So they feel they get temporary paralysis, and of course, to top on that, the lack of nutrition. Dan, I'm going to come back to you on this. Mr. Bhushan mentioned that when he raised the case in the Supreme Court about the deportation, the government of India responded by saying that if they go back to Myanmar, which is where they have faced persecution and been killed, it is of no concern to India. In our report we talk about recommendations, and we also talk about recommendations to the government of India. We're also looking at what in the upcoming meetings between the US and India. Prime Minister Modi is going to be meeting with President Biden in June, and then they're going to be meeting in September around the G20 summit. What are the kind of recommendations that we want to raise for the government of India and for the United States?
Thank you, Priyali. Yeah, I think, as I said before, the story of the Rohingya in India is one of detention and deportation. It's one of.
Dan, we can't hear you. 1 second. Just hold on. You're muted. So we'll just get you unmuted.
Thank you. So as I was saying earlier, the story of of Rohingya in India is one of deportation and detention. It's also one of lack of legal status, but I think it's also a story of hope. And I don't just mean in an abstract sense of what could happen. I mean, we saw in the film with Farhana, what she was able to accomplish on an individual level. But I mean hope on a practical level. And that's where these upcoming summits, where we have a series of practical recommendations, and that includes things like providing some kind of a special Aadhaar card or recognition of the UNHCR card to give some kind of status that opens the way for all these basic rights that the Rohingya should have in India. But I think there's room for political will to take these practical steps forward as well. India has a long history of welcoming refugees, even if inconsistently. It's been involved with the Global Refugee Forum, which is coming up later this year. And as you mentioned, leading the G20 and then having the meeting with President Biden next month coming up. So I think it should very much be in the interest of India to improve its treatment of the Rohingya, and at the very least, returning survivors of genocide back to the regime that caused them to flee will certainly undermine any kind of more positive message that India is trying to express.
Thanks, Dan. Mr. Bhushan, is it surprising that we don't have a law or refugee policy in India? And do you think that is by design?
We don't have a law, but the government says that it has a standard operating procedure for dealing with refugees, and it is in line with the Refugee Convention. So on paper, the government has been saying, at least in the United Nations and international fora, that it practically, without having signed the Refugee Convention, it abides by all the principles of the Refugee Convention. And that's why, see, what they say on paper, or what they say for the consumption of the international bodies, UN, etc., is one thing. What they do on the ground here is something totally different. This particular government, because it suits their political design, so they treat the Tamil refugees completely differently from the Rohingya refugees. It treats even other refugees differently. But Rohingya refugees have been particularly earmarked for being part of the political agenda of the government, which is to paint them as Muslim terrorists and thereby engender hatred against Muslims in general. So this is, unfortunately, the Rohingya refugees have become victims to the larger political design of the government. Otherwise, 20,000 refugees are accommodating them or being humane to them or treating them as refugees would not have been any problem for India, because there are many, many more Tamil refugees or other refugees living in India. But unfortunately, they have become victims to the larger political design, the communal design of this BJP government.
So you're saying that in our report we say that this is one of the world's most persecuted population in the world, and instead of giving refuge, they're being re-victimized. And so what I hear from you and what I've heard from the refugees is that the re-victimization is mostly because of their ethnicity and their religion, and that's being paid politically. So Jenny, again coming to you, Mr. Bhushan mentioned the government has a standard operating procedure, the SOPs, and I heard you mention that in your case and read through your documents. Um, can you tell us a little bit about how the SOPs are not looked at or followed? For example, how many number of months they can be in detention, irrespective of that is not. Can you just share a little bit about that?
Like I said, the detention process itself is so clandestine. It does not have any safeguards. So a civil civil administration, a civil detention, civil administrative detention, particularly does not have a very clear procedure by which they are being brought before the court, or say, so taking somebody under custody, putting them under arrest, even if it's a civil arrest, should be the last resort. Even the SOP says the last resort, when there is absolutely no other way but to deport this person. But as we understand, these SOPs even define about who, I mean, foreigners who claim to be refugees and who qualifies to be a refugee. And it's the standard definition. These are people persecuted and who have well-founded fears of returning and being further persecuted, right? Now, when that also is not something that is appealing to the authorities, and there has to be reason. All these orders have to be reasoned. Even then, the deportation as per their SOPs is supposed to be within a period of maximum 3 months. Now, for Rohingyas, for a fact, they don't get to deport them by following due process. Of course, we take them to the borders and push them out, but that's something illegal. That's something you cannot do. If you have to follow the due process, you cannot, because Myanmar clearly these are people. We don't have citizens by these names. So what do you do with these people? You take them and push them into such conditions which are not conducive of human existence. I mean, if every refugee who is registered with the UNHCR, their biometrics are already with the Foreign Regional Registration Office. So they know where they live. We have sufficient surveillance going in there in the settlements. So there is no way they're escaping or causing a threat. If they're causing a threat or a danger, then one needs to see them from a criminal point of view. Now, the purpose of this detention itself are very unknown, and by law they cannot be detained indefinitely. And the SOP says 6 months.
So the SOP is saying that beyond a period of 6 months, if a refugee or a Rohingya refugee is in detention, they should be released, the biometrics should be taken, and they should be going for frequent verification to the police station. Is that correct, Mr. Bhushan?
See, refugee cannot be detained. The detention can only be for an illegal immigrant. See, there is a distinction between an illegal immigrant and a refugee. So, a refugee has to be given refuge under the standard operating procedure. Only an illegal migrant can be detained, and that too for up to 6 months, etc. And even for reporting them back, you have to follow the procedure that is which she has mentioned. That you have to get the other country to whom you are sending them to agree to take them. And in this particular case, once when the government claimed that that these people have agreed to go back, and Myanmar has agreed to take them, but Myanmar was not giving them citizenship. And yet the government made these false claims, and unfortunately the Supreme Court did not even bother to get them verified by some international or some independent observer.
So what we're saying is that firstly, Savira's sister and many others like her, they are, even though they are refugees, they're looked at as illegal immigrants, which is unconstitutional. Secondly, that even if they were looked at as illegal immigrants and put into the detention center, they cannot be there beyond 6 months. And Savira's sister Shadia has been there for more than 2 years. So overall, this entire scenario is illegal. In fact, we have seen documents. When we were interviewing, there was a Rohingya man in Hyderabad who came crying and said, "Man, can you please do our interview?" And he brought like a whole file of legal papers. It took me like almost half a day to sort through it, and I saw that there was a judgment in the Calcutta court because his family, his wife and children, as soon as they enter, are in the Dum Central Jail. The judgment was, or the order was, that they're going to be in jail for 2 to 3 years. It's been 8 years that his wife and his kids are in prison, and they haven't been let out. So this indefinite arbitrary detention is happening to many. And I'm going to wrap up with Sabira. I'm going to get an opinion from, ask her what, Sabira, आप क्या चाहेंगी अभी? आपकी क्या ख्वाहिश है? What would Sabira want?
हम बहुत अच्छे से रह रहे हैं, इंडिया से बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया, बहुत अच्छा से रह रहे हैं, बहुत अच्छा से खाना पीना मिल रहा है। जैसा हमारा बैंक डिटेंशन सेंटर में वैसा हमें परेशानी हो गई, फिर जैसा हमारा फैमिली में चेंज हो गया, तो डिटेंशन सेंटर में भी जाने में पैसे लगेंगे, बच्चा पढ़ाने में पैसे लगेंगे। अभी बच्चा 2-3 बच्चा स्कूल में जाता है सरकारी, वो भी गाड़ी चले अलग से सुबह 100 रुपये, तो कितना कमाते हैं लोग, कमाने वाला है, एक घर वाले कमाने वाला है, चार बच्चे हैं, तो हम नहीं चाहते किसी जगह में जाना चाहते।
Sabira is saying that she's
बच्चे आगे बढ़ाने के लिए, बच्चे आगे पढ़ाना।
Sabira is saying that she's grateful for the fact that she is here in India. But it costs a lot of money to be here in India. There's no access to livelihood because of which, and everything costs money. Even to go visit her sister at the detention center, as I said, costs a lot of money. And so she's hoping that if they can't live with basic access to services and dignity in India, that they will be settled in another country. With that, we're going to open up to the Q&A. If anybody has question and answers for anybody here, Jan, we'll do about 5-6 questions. Do we have a question, Mike?
Has this question been asked?
We'll take the mic so that less people
Okay.
hear. And turn it on.
Is there an argument to be made, sir, or Jenny? Okay, we let them in. So how are we describing people who, because they haven't come in by some mysterious unknown route. Their entry into our country is something that's been documented. So how are we declaring them illegal when we know exactly how they've come in? Is there an, because it's very clear that a lot of very sensible arguments are not working in court. What has been said about an argument like this?
No, the government, they let them in. The government is saying that they just came in surreptitiously, illegally, etc. This is what the government is saying. They're not saying that they were let in by the Indian government.
But isn't it on record that isn't the entry of each of these Rohingya individuals?
Not the entry. Many of them have got refugee cards from the UNHCR. And the refugee cards are given on the basis of UNHCR determining that they are refugees, that they have fled from a country, not on the basis of their entry into India being consensual or being permitted by the Indian authorities.
So, really, from the conversation that you've had, how has someone entered? Did they come through the border in the darkness of night? Is that what has happened in a lot of cases?
Yes, most of them, they could be stopped, and a lot of them, while crossing in, have been detained. So most of them come in a way that they hope nobody finds them out, because they know in a way that India doesn't look at them as asylum seekers. Ideally, in another country that is signatory of the Refugee Convention or looks at refugees, if a person who is from a persecuted population comes in, they would immediately come in and say, I'm seeking asylum. But that's not happening in India. Sanjay?
My question is, the UN, role of the UNHCR. Like most of them who have been detained, they got the card from the UNHCR, and so what they are doing? Are they raising the matter? Because this also raises very valid questions. They are authorized to issue card on that basis. They stay back, and still the government of India detain these registered refugees in the illegal detention center. So what they are doing, their role also needs to be questioned. That why they are not proactive in getting them released, why they are not taking proactively these cases with the government of India, what they are doing at the UN agency. Second thing is about that how many people are in detention center right now.
So our estimate from talking to human rights advocates is that there are about 500 people in detention. It's an estimate number, there is no record. And that about 50% of them are women and children. And to your first question, I'm going to let Dan answer that and then quickly come back to Jenny because I know she has something to say on that. Dan, you want to take Sanjay's first question?
Sure. In the past, the UNHCR card at least provided some form of protection, some level, and access to basic services. But since in more recent years, it's been declared as having no consequence, and so it's really been devalued. And we heard from a lot of people a lot of frustration with UNHCR not speaking out more strongly about the lack of status for the Rohingya and about the not having access to the detention centers. So that's something in the report that we have a recommendation for UNHCR to be more proactive on these issues.
Okay, do you want to come in on that?
Well, I can't be the spokesperson for UNHCR, but I truly feel that they should be a lot more proactive. I understand that UNHCR functions in a way where they practice more advocacy than litigation, but even the advocacy has to be a little stronger, perhaps, because I'm not aware of any case in which they have been able to successfully bring people out of arbitrary detention beyond those 6 months and to enforce the law, implement the law. And I'm grateful that they are in the country, they're giving out the identity cards, which are so important. But they should be able to play a role a little more than just ID card handlers. So yes, I think being proactive is what UNHCR should be doing.
Any more questions? Anybody else has a question? Sorry.
You mentioned the Supreme Court has not ruled in any favor, but said that the Indian government does not consider their responsibility. In such cases, what does one do? Because we've always been told Supreme Court is sort of the last recourse. We heard about 500 people are detained out of 20,000. I'm not able to connect the dots and understand what might be the purpose of this and what purpose, even if wrong, does it serve? Because the government has declared all of them illegal and several other illegal. So what purpose does detention serve? Because detention also takes resources.
Good question, Mr. Bhushan.
So on your first question, if the Supreme Court doesn't respond, what does one do? Of course, the main case is still pending in the Supreme Court, where all these issues will be finally decided, and we hope to get a hearing sometime later this year of the main case. These were just a couple of interim orders for a very few Rohingyas who were about to be deported. Now, what does one do if the Supreme Court finally doesn't respond? Well, we can only appeal to public opinion. We can only, like the work that the Azadi Project has done, or what Refugees International or what some other agencies are doing in India, to bring home the plight of the Rohingya refugees to the people of India at large. I don't believe that the majority of the Indian people have become so communal that they will be against the Rohingya refugees just because they are Muslims. But unfortunately, for this government, it suits their political narrative to paint them like that and to be heartless towards them. This is their part of their political design. But let's hope that this government goes by the end of within the next 1 year, and we will have a more humane regime in place.
Okay, we have 3 questions. Okay, we have 4 questions. We'll do this very quickly and then we'll wrap up. Okay, so Priyanka, you raise your hand first. So, and then Induji, and then one there, and well, okay, so I'm just saying that people here will also have like opportunity to have tea, sandwiches, pakore outside of the lawns.
So
And
let's wrap up quickly.
we can network and ask the questions there also. So Priyanka, let's go with your question.
Okay, and pardon my ignorance on this one, so it's a very basic question. What stops, if not the government, clearly the government doesn't care, but what stops NGOs, agencies to look for safer havens for Rohingya refugees outside of India, if at all? Is there a legality? Can they not look for it? What stops them, if at all?
No, nothing stops them, and they should. But one problem that is happening, that I have come to know recently, is that some of these Rohingyas are wanting to go to other countries who are willing to accept them. They have been given visas of those countries, but the Indian government is not allowing them to leave India. I mean, this is very strange.
How can that happen? That is actually happening.
That's happening. Unfortunately, that's happening. Of course, if one goes to court on that, hopefully the court will order the government to allow them to go. But unfortunately, the Indian government is doing that.
And that's actually one of our recommendations. We've said that the Indian government should give exit visas to the people who have gotten resettlement outside of India, which is very rare, but they have managed to get sponsorships, but still they're not been given an exit visa. Question, Anji? Yes.
Thank you to FCC for organizing this discussion. My name is Manish Agarwal. So basically, I feel that it's a difficult situation and we should not arrive at anything in the ideal case scenario. I have 2 small questions. Like, we are talking about the international law and this thing. So actually, Burma, Myanmar, why does it there is international law? So how long the situations are like that is where that Myanmar, the original country, will continue to persecute their own citizens, the Rohingya Muslims. So I mean, can't the UN or the international law be applied to them, and it's indefinitely. Secondly, the Russia-Ukraine war is going on, and a lot of Ukrainian people are going out. They are seeking refuge. They have many large number of Ukrainian refugees are there joining European countries. So I mean, why doesn't the original country be held responsible and be taken to task under the UN this international law? Why doesn't it apply to them? I mean, we are letting them go scot-free. We are not blaming Myanmar. So I mean, or the original country as a situation scares me.
Yes, actually, let Dan come in on that. Dan, you want to quickly respond with like short brief?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question very well.
His question was that why is nobody blaming Myanmar about persecuting the Rohingya and the Muslim minority population there, and how long is that going to be going on, and can the situation be made more conducive for them to return?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think that everything starts here with the treatment of the Rohingya by the Myanmar junta, military junta, and there are efforts on the international level, particularly at the International Court of Justice, to hold them accountable. And we've seen some measures taken in terms of targeted sanctions and pressure on Myanmar, but a lot more of that needs to happen. I mean, that is the long-term goal, is to create the conditions where Rohingya can go home safely. But as we've talked about a lot today, in the interim, the countries of refuge really need to step up to at least meet the minimum levels of protection.
So let me just add here. See, the International Court of Justice has ruled on a petition by Gambia that Myanmar is engaged in genocide.
नहीं भाई
The problem is what there are. It's only the UN Security Council which can do something by way of, I mean, they will have to basically send troops to Myanmar in order to take over from the military junta there. And unfortunately, the Security Council is dominated by some countries which have their own geopolitical considerations, etc. So it's kind of
Okay, two quick questions. Indraji and Abhishek, that's it. After that, no. Your question, you take it after. Prof.
My thing is very simple, that your current Home Minister and the Prime Minister that we have, they understand only the Vedic things, Prashant. That is, they have forgotten their own Vedic hymn which says that Atiti Devo Bhava. Atiti Devo Bhava, which means that the guest, treat the guest as gods. So, do we tell them in Sanskrit that you follow your own Sanskrit, talk about the word? You know, they are such big fools that they don't understand their own Vedic culture as such. You know, and then we say, Sai itna dije jave kutum samay, main bhi bhukha na raha hu, saguna bhukha ja. And do we ask the caste and religion of Aditi? But what are they doing? They are doing politics of people's lives. Thank you.
इंदुजी, that's a comment. आपको उसका response चाहिए कि आपने respond कर दिया है? That's true. Atiti Devo Bhava. Literally translated in English is the guest is God. Abhishek, your question.
And G20 and then. Yes.
I also our college had that Abhishek?
Yeah, so my question is to distribution. I mean, you've argued around the political industry of the current dispensation. I mean, from my limited knowledge, India has persecution and there's exodus has been happening even before that. So I think to sort of think of of course, it's people who rooted there in time with CA and it maybe became a fantastic campaign. There is no doubt it seems there. But to sort of just think of it as a political will of the current dispensation, maybe there is a larger question that why there is no political will irrespective of what government comes into power. So I think maybe that's a question and also something as a democracy to think about.
Yeah, so the new if this government is replaced, then I hope that the new government will finally sign and ratify the Refugee Convention. It's unfortunate that that's not been signed and ratified. Though the previous government as well as this government have been saying in the United Nations that our standard operating procedure is in tune with the Refugee Convention, even though we have not signed it. So yes, it's true that the other governments have also not done what they ought to have been doing. The first thing is to sign the Refugee Convention, and the second thing is to provide humane conditions for all these refugees. That's their obligation, not just under Article 21, but also under various other conventions, to provide humane and certainly not detaining them. So, of course, there is a difference between the way in which the previous governments treated these people and the way in which the present government is treating them. There is a difference. But yes, the other governments also should be doing better.
Okay, with that, we're going to wrap the panel discussion and I'm going to hand over the mic to my colleague Kainat to do a vote.
I just wanted to say that this film and this report is absolutely fantastic, and I congratulate both the Azadi project as well as Refugee. It's very global service to humanity.
Okay. दी आज़ादी प्रोजेक्ट और रेफ्यूजी इंटरनेशनल की तरफ से मैं अपने सभी पैनलिस्ट को बहुत शुक्रिया देना चाहती हूँ और मैं प्रशांत भूषण जी का बहुत शुक्रिया अदा करना चाहूँगी कि उन्होंने अपना कीमती समय हमारे इस इवेंट के लिए निकाला। उज्जैनी और साबिरा जी, थैंक यू सो मच, आपने अपने केस और उससे संबंधित जितने भी आपके अनुभव रहे उनको हमारे साथ यहाँ साझा किया। Then of course from Refugee International और प्रियाली दी आज़ादी प्रोजेक्ट से, उनकी मेहनत की वजह से आज हम लोग इस इवेंट को पूरा कर पाए हैं, उनकी साझेदारी से, तो उनको बहुत बड़ा थैंक यू। और आप सभी का बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया यहाँ आने के लिए, इस इवेंट को महत्वपूर्ण बनाने के लिए। और मैं उम्मीद करती हूँ कि हम सब जो यहाँ से सीख के जा रहे हैं, किसी ना किसी तरह अपने स्तर पर हम सही जानकारी को दूसरों तक पहुँचा पाएंगे, तो ये उम्मीद है मेरी आप सबसे। थैंक यू सो मच। प्रियाली ने बताया हमारा रिफ्रेशमेंट बाहर है और उसके अलावा हमारा एग्जीबिशन लगा हुआ है बाहर, आप अपना कंट्रीब्यूशन दें उसमें। ये सारा अगर हम इससे कुछ भी चीज़ ले पाएंगे तो वो रेफ्यूजीज के कॉज के लिए ही जाएगा। सो थैंक यू सो मच।
बंद